First contact at frontier's edge. The fluorescent lights of Outpost 47 flickered in their usual erratic pattern, casting strange shadows across the medical supply crates Sarah Chen was inventorying. 20 years of combat medicine hadn't prepared her for the mind-numbing tedium of running a civilian clinic on the edge of human space. She absently rubbed the synth muscle implant in her right shoulder, a souvenir from the Arcturus campaign that still ached when she was bored. The station's public address system crackled. Attention! Incoming Vilaxian medical transport. All personnel maintain standard quarantine protocols. Sarah's head snapped up, her boredom instantly forgotten. Vilaxians were rare this far out on the frontier. Their species' notorious sensitivity to temperature fluctuations made space travel challenging at best, potentially lethal at worst. Their ships maintained such precise environmental controls that most stations couldn't even accommodate their docking requirements. Chen to control. What's their status? She called out, already reaching for her medical kit. Single passenger, priority medical clearance, control responded. They're requesting immediate assistance with life support systems. Sarah was moving before control finished speaking. The station's corridors blurred past as muscle memory from her military days took over. She'd treated Vilaxians exactly twice in her career. Both times had been during the liberation of New Jakarta, when their medical expertise had proved invaluable in understanding the bioweapons being used against civilian populations. The docking bay's atmospheric shields shimmered as she arrived. Through them, she could see the Vilaxian ship, sleek, organic curves typical of their bioengineered technology. Its hull was pulsing with an irregular pattern that Sarah recognized as a sign of systems failure. Life support's failing, she muttered, punching in her medical override codes. Control, I'm going in. Begin emergency quarantine procedures. The ship's outer hull parted like living tissue as she approached. The interior was bathed in the bioluminescent glow that Vilaxians used instead of artificial lighting. The temperature hit her like a wall, at least 40 degrees Celsius and humid enough to make her skin instantly slick with sweat. Hello, she called out. This is Dr. Chen from Outpost 47. I'm here to help. A weak ripple of bioluminescence answered her from deeper in the ship. Sarah followed it to what appeared to be the ship's medical bay. There, curled in what looked like a nest of living tissue, was a young Vilaxian. Their crystalline exoskeleton, which should have been gleaming with internal light, was dull and clouded. Temperature, controls. The Vilaxian managed, their translator struggling to convert the biochemical signals they used for communication into something Sarah's implant could understand. Ships, dying. Sarah's medical scanner was already out, taking readings. The Vilaxians' core temperature was dropping dangerously. Their species required precisely maintained heat levels to prevent their biochemistry from literally crystallizing. I'm Dr. Sarah Chen, she said, keeping her voice calm while her hands moved with practiced efficiency, setting up an emergency heating unit. Can you tell me your name? KRF, they managed. Student, was trying to reach. Medical Academy. Sarah's eyebrows rose. The Galactic Medical Academy was the most prestigious medical institution in known space, and notoriously conservative about accepting non-standard students. A Vilaxian applying there was like a fish applying to a flight school. Well, KIRF, let's focus on getting you stabilized first, she said, activating the heating unit. Then we can talk about career goals. As warm air began circulating, she noticed something odd about KIRF's exoskeleton. The patterns weren't just clouded, they were malformed in places, showing signs of irregular crystal growth. This wasn't just environmental exposure. KRF, these formations, you have crystalline dispersion syndrome, don't you? The young Vilaxian's bioluminescence flickered in what Sarah recognized as embarrassment. CDS was a rare genetic condition that made it even harder for Vilaxians to regulate their temperature. Most affected individuals never left their home planets. They said, I couldn't possibly survive, space travel, KRF's translator rendered their biochemical pulses into halting speech. But I calculated, developed new protocols, was working until your ship's systems failed, Sarah finished, her medical scanner showing KRF's readings beginning to stabilize. That's quite impressive, actually. Developing protocols to manage CDS in space. That's exactly the kind of thinking the Medical Academy needs. KRF's crystalline structure brightened slightly. You don't think it's foolish? Sarah thought about her own career, about all the times she'd been told a human couldn't possibly understand alien physiology well enough to be an effective combat medic. She thought about the lives she'd saved by proving those doubters wrong. KRF, do you know why humans ended up being such good space travelers? She asked, adjusting the heating unit settings. It's not because we're particularly tough or naturally suited for it. It's because we're stubborn enough to keep trying until we figure out solutions to problems everyone else called impossible. The young Vilaxian's bioluminescence pulsed with interest. That's what I want to do. Find solutions. Help others like me. Sarah looked at her medical readings again. With proper support, KRF's condition was manageable. The real challenge would be convincing the hidebound bureaucrats at the Medical Academy to give them a chance. But then, convincing stubborn officials to do the right thing had been part of her job description for 20 years. Well, she said, a familiar spark of purpose igniting in her chest, let's see what we can do about that. In the station's control room, the duty officer watched in bewilderment as Dr. Chen began requisitioning materials for an extended stay patient. He'd never seen the usually taciturn ex-combat medic so animated. Something interesting was about to happen on Outpost 47. The officer just hoped the station would survive it. The healing touch. 3 weeks after the emergency landing, Outpost 47's medical bay had transformed into something the station's original designers would hardly recognize. The main treatment room now maintained a constant 42 degrees Celsius, and the walls pulsed with strips of bioluminescent algae Sarah had synthesized to help KRF feel more at home. The crystallization rate decreases by approximately 0.3% when exposed to the Terran heating frequencies, KRF explained, their translator now perfectly calibrated to their biochemical signals. They manipulated a holographic display showing their latest test results, crystalline appendages moving with precise grace. Sarah leaned closer, her cybernetic eye automatically adjusting to the bioluminescent lighting. But it's still not enough for deep space conditions, she mused, absently rubbing her shoulder implant. We need something more adaptive. The past weeks had revealed KIRF to be not just brilliant, but revolutionary in their approach to xenomedicine. Their understanding of crystalline biology went far beyond anything Sarah had encountered in her decades of medical service. The young Vilaxian had already developed several theoretical treatments for conditions most specialists considered untreatable. Look at this, KRF's crystalline structure flickered with excitement as they pulled up another hologram. I've been studying human thermal regulation systems, particularly your military environmental suits. The principles are fascinating. Sarah watched as the hologram displayed a complex molecular diagram. Are you proposing a biomechanical interface? Yes. KRF's entire body pulsed with enthusiasm. Human technology excels at rapid adaptation to changing conditions. If we could integrate that with Vilaxian crystalline biology, you could create a self-regulating system, Sarah finished, her medical mind racing ahead. One that wouldn't just compensate for temperature changes, but actively predict and prevent crystallization. Their discussion was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the station's chief medical officer. The older woman took in the transformed medical bay with a mixture of amusement and resignation. I see you've redecorated again, Chen, she remarked dryly. The board of directors is having fits about the power consumption. The board can bill me, Sarah replied without looking up from the hologram. Yuki, you need to see this. KRF has developed something revolutionary. As they explained the concept, Yuki's professional skepticism gradually gave way to genuine interest. This could have applications beyond just crystalline dispersion syndrome, she said slowly. The ability to integrate technological and biological regulatory systems at this level. Exactly, Sarah's voice held the same intensity she'd once reserved for battlefield triage situations. This isn't just about helping one species. This could revolutionize how we approach environmental adaptation in space. The Medical Academy still won't consider my application. KRF's bioluminescence dimmed slightly. They say the accommodations required would be prohibitive. Sarah straightened, her expression hardening into what her old combat unit had called her about to do something crazy face. Then we'll have to show them they're wrong. Yuki, remember that conference you mentioned? The one at Epsilon Station next month? The Galactic Medical Innovation Summit? Yuki's eyes widened. Sarah, you can't be serious. The registration deadline was weeks ago, and the selection committee is notoriously. The selection committee includes 3 of your former classmates from medical school, Sarah interrupted. And the keynote speaker is Admiral Zhang, who still owes me a favor from that mess on Titan. Even if you could get a presentation slot, Yuki argued, the environmental requirements alone are exactly what we need to demonstrate, Sarah countered. What better way to prove the viability of KRF's invention than by using it to present at the galaxy's most prestigious medical conference? KRF's crystalline structure vibrated with a mixture of hope and anxiety. But, the prototype isn't ready. We haven't even begun practical trials. Sarah's grin held a hint of the same determination that had once led her to perform surgery in the middle of a radiation storm. Then we'd better get to work, hadn't we? Yuki, I'm going to need unrestricted access to the fabrication labs. The board will never approve. The board, Sarah said firmly, can either help us revolutionize space medicine, or explain to Starfleet Medical why they ignored a breakthrough in environmental adaptation technology. Their choice. As Yuki left to begin what would undoubtedly be a series of interesting conversations with station administration, Sarah turned back to KRF. The young Vilaxian's crystalline surface was rippling with complex patterns that her translator rendered as a mixture of determination and fear. Dr. Chen. Sarah, why are you doing all this for me? Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering. Finally, she said, because 20 years ago, I watched a Vilaxian doctor save an entire colony from a bioweapon when everyone else said it was impossible. They did it because they refused to accept that some people were beyond helping. She met KRF's crystalline gaze. The galaxy needs more doctors like that. The medical bay's bioluminescent lights pulsed in harmony with KRF's answering glow. Outside, the eternal darkness of space pressed against the station's viewports, a reminder of all the barriers they still had to overcome. But Sarah Chen had long ago learned that the most important medical tool wasn't a scanner or a surgical laser, it was the stubborn refusal to accept limitations. And as she watched KRF begin calibrating their next series of tests, she knew that same determination burned within the young Vilaxian's crystalline heart. The galaxy wasn't ready for what they were about to create. That, Sarah reflected with a smile, was exactly the point. Breaking barriers. The fabrication lab hummed with energy as Sarah manipulated the molecular assembler's controls. Sweat beaded on her forehead, they'd raised the lab's temperature to match Vilaxian comfort levels, making it feel more like a tropical greenhouse than a medical facility. Crystal matrix integration at 67%, KRF announced, their own crystalline structure glowing with concentrated effort. The human synthetic nerve fibers are accepting the biological interface. They were attempting their 15th prototype of what Sarah had started calling the Adaptive Crystalline Environment Suit, or ACES. The previous 14 attempts lay scattered around the lab, each failure bringing them closer to success. Power fluctuation in Sector 3, warned Dr. Tanaka from her monitoring station. The biological components are drawing more energy than predicted. Sarah's cybernetic eye tracked the power readings, her combat medics training allowing her to process multiple data streams simultaneously. KIRF, can you modify the crystal growth pattern? We need to maintain homeostasis without overloading the system. The young Vilaxian's appendages moved in precise patterns over their control interface. Adjusting growth vectors, implementing the new algorithms I developed based on human capillary systems. The prototype surface shifted, crystalline structures realigning themselves with an organic fluidity that seemed to defy physics. Sarah watched in fascination as the power reading stabilized, then improved. That's incredible, Yuki breathed, checking her readings. The crystal matrix is actually learning from the human biotech components. It's creating new efficiency patterns I've never seen before. Because nobody's ever tried this combination before, Sarah said, her voice holding a note of triumph. Everyone's been so focused on making different species adapt to standard environmental systems. We're letting the environment adapt to the species instead. Their work was interrupted by the lab's communication system. Dr. Chen. There's a priority message from the Medical Academy Board. Sarah exchanged glances with Yuki. They'd submitted their conference proposal 3 days ago, using every connection and favor they could call in. Put it through. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the stern face of Dr. Venare, the Academy's head of admissions. The Centaurian's expression was typically unreadable. Dr. Chen, they began formally. We have reviewed your unusual proposal for the Galactic Medical Innovation Summit. While your credentials are impressive, the logistics of accommodating a Vilaxian presenter, particularly one with CDS, are exactly what we intend to demonstrate, Sarah interrupted, her voice carrying the same authority that had once commanded emergency medical teams in combat zones. Dr. Venare, what you're calling a logistical problem is precisely the breakthrough we're presenting. She gestured to KIRF, who stepped forward. The young Vilaxian's crystalline surface was perfect, stable despite the recent exertion of their work. The prototype components they wore gleamed with an inner light that pulsed in sync with their natural bioluminescence. I can maintain full function in standard environmental conditions for up to 8 hours, KIRF stated, their translator rendering their biochemical signals into clear, confident speech. The system adapts automatically to temperature variations while allowing full sensory and motor control. Venare's many eyes blinked in rapid succession, a sign of surprise in Centaurians. That's impossible. The energy requirements alone are 63% lower than standard environmental suits, Yuki cut in, sending across the test data. The crystal matrix actually generates power as it adapts, creating a semi-closed system. And the medical applications go far beyond just environmental adaptation, Sarah pressed their advantage. Imagine surgical suits that automatically adjust to different species' biological requirements. Emergency response equipment that adapts to any environment. The possibilities are endless. There was a long moment of silence as Venare studied the data. Finally, they spoke. The summit committee will expect a full demonstration. Any failure could damage both the Academy's reputation and your own, Dr. Chen. Understanding comes from failure, KRF said quietly. Isn't that one of the Academy's founding principles? That we learn not by succeeding, but by failing and trying again. The Centaurian's eyes fixed on the young Vilaxian, really seeing them perhaps for the first time. You've studied our teachings. I've studied everything about the Academy, Karatha's bioluminescence pulsed with passion. Its history, its principles, its greatest achievements. Because I believe in what it stands for, the idea that medicine transcends species, that healing knows no boundaries. Sarah felt a surge of pride as she watched her young friend stand firm under the Academy director's scrutiny. This was what she'd seen in KIRF from the beginning, not just brilliance, but a deep understanding of what medicine truly meant. Very well, Venare said finally. You have your presentation slot. But be warned, the summit attracts the most skeptical minds in galactic medicine. They will not be easily convinced. After the transmission ended, Yuki let out a breath she'd been holding. Well, that's either a huge breakthrough or a disaster in the making. Could be both, Sarah grinned, already turning back to their work. Those are usually the most interesting kinds of situations. She looked at KIRF, who was studying the prototype with renewed determination. Ready to show the galaxy what's possible. The young Vilaxian's crystalline surface rippled with what Sarah had learned to recognize as their version of a smile. Ready to fail until we succeed. That's the spirit. Sarah's hands flew over the controls, initiating another test sequence. Now, let's see if we can improve that 8-hour duration. We've got exactly 3 weeks to turn impossible into inevitable. Around them, the prototype's crystal matrix continued to pulse and adapt, each cycle bringing them closer to their goal. In the lab's heated air, human and Vilaxian worked side by side, proving with every passing moment that the greatest medical breakthroughs came not from accepting limitations, but from daring to break them. Trial by fire. The Galactic Medical Innovation Summit was in full swing when the emergency alert cut through Epsilon Station's normal background hum. Sarah was in the preparation room with KIRF, making final adjustments to their presentation equipment, when the station's AI made the announcement. Emergency Protocol Alpha. Containment breach in Xenobiology Lab 7. All medical personnel report to emergency stations. Sarah's combat instincts kicked in immediately. What's in Lab 7? She demanded, accessing the station's medical database through her cybernetic interface. Pyrolithic bacterial samples from the Vega system, KIRF answered before the computer could, their crystalline structure pulsing with concern. Highly aggressive thermophilic organisms. If they've breached containment, they'll raise the station's temperature to lethal levels trying to establish a colony, Sarah finished grimly. She was already moving toward the door when she realized KIRF was following. Wait, you can't. My suit can handle extreme temperatures, the young Vilaxian interrupted. And I'm the foremost expert on crystalline biological interfaces in this sector of space. Their translator rendered their next words with perfect clarity, you need me. Sarah hesitated only a moment before nodding sharply. Stay close. Follow my lead. They reached the emergency zone to find chaos. The corridor outside Lab 7 was already noticeably warmer, and warning lights painted the scene in pulsing red. Dr. Venare was there with other summit attendees, arguing with the station's security chief. The containment protocols aren't working, the security chief was saying. The bacteria are adapting faster than our systems can compensate. At this rate, they'll breach the secondary barriers within 20 minutes. What about emergency venting? Someone suggested. Negative, the station's AI responded. The breach has compromised the emergency vent controls. Manual override required from inside the contaminated zone. Sarah stepped forward, her mind already racing through options. What's the current temperature in the lab? 78 degrees Celsius and rising, the AI reported. Approaching lethal levels for most organic life forms. Not for me, KIRF said quietly. All eyes turned to the young Vilaxian, their ACE's prototype gleaming under the emergency lights. My suit can handle far higher temperatures, and my crystalline biology is naturally resistant to heat damage. Out of the question, Venare began. The risk is acceptable, Sarah cut in, her voice carrying the weight of countless battlefield decisions. We don't have time to debate. KIRF is right, they're our best chance. She turned to her young friend, switching to emergency procedure mode. The bacteria will be attracted to any heat source. We can use that. If we can lure them into a concentrated mass. We can trigger a flash freeze using modified crystalline matrices, KIRF finished, their thought patterns aligning perfectly with Sarah's. My suit's crystal generation systems can be repurposed to create a freezing field. Absolutely not, the security chief protested. This is completely against protocol. Protocol isn't going to save this station, Sarah snapped. She faced Venare. You wanted a demonstration. Well, here it is. This is exactly what we've been trying to tell you. Adaptation isn't just about surviving, it's about turning supposed weaknesses into strengths. The Centaurians' multiple eyes blinked rapidly as they processed the situation. Finally, they gave a sharp nod. Do it. But Dr. Chen goes with you as backup. My suit won't protect me from those temperatures, Sarah began, but Kareth was already manipulating their suit's controls. Yes, it will, they said, their crystalline appendages moving with precise confidence. Because we're going to share mine. Before anyone could object, Kareth's suit began to expand, crystal matrices growing and reforming to create a secondary protective layer. The biological interface can adapt to human physiology. I've been working on this modification ever since we started. Just in case. Sarah stared at her friend, momentarily speechless. Then she grinned. You brilliant, sneaky thing. You've been holding out on me. I learned from the best. Kareth's bioluminescence pulsed with what might have been humor. Ready to make the impossible inevitable. The next 10 minutes were a blur of activity as they prepared for their intervention. The crystalline protective field enveloped Sarah like a second skin, its surface rippling with the same adaptive patterns as Kareth's suit. Together, they entered the overheated lab while the station's best medical minds watched in astonishment. The interior was like stepping into an oven. Even through the crystal protection, Sarah could feel the intense heat. But Kareth moved with confidence, their crystalline biology actually seeming to draw strength from the extreme conditions. There, they pointed to a roiling mass of bacterial growth near the lab's central processing unit. They're trying to reach the station's primary environmental controls. Sarah's cybernetic eye analyzed the situation. If we can get them to follow us to the auxiliary cooling system. Already calculating the crystallization patterns, Kareth confirmed. They began generating excess heat through their suit, creating an irresistible lure for the thermophilic bacteria. What followed was a dangerous dance as they led the bacterial mass through the lab, staying just ahead of the advancing colony while Kareth's crystals grew and adapted. When they finally reached the cooling system, Kareth's entire body blazed with light. Now, they called out. The crystal matrices exploded outward, transforming from heat-resistant barriers to freezing lattices in an instant. The bacterial colony, drawn to what it perceived as the ultimate heat source, was caught in a crystalline web that dropped the temperature to absolute zero in microseconds. When the emergency response team finally entered the lab, they found the bacterial threat completely neutralized, encased in a beautiful, fractal-like crystal structure that looked more like an art installation than a containment measure. In the aftermath, as station personnel worked to secure the frozen bacterial sample for study, Sarah watched Venare approach Kareth. The Centaurian's expression was unreadable as ever, but their voice held a note of respect Sarah hadn't heard before. It seems, they said carefully, that we may need to reconsider our position on adaptive solutions to medical challenges. Kareth's crystalline surface rippled with quiet pride. All I ask is the chance to prove what's possible. I believe, Venare replied, you already have. Sarah smiled, feeling the familiar satisfaction of watching barriers break down and minds open to new possibilities. Sometimes, she reflected, the most powerful medicine wasn't found in drugs or surgery, but in the simple act of proving that limitations existed only in the mind. The crystal structure continued to glow softly in the restored lab, a beautiful reminder that sometimes the best solutions came from embracing what others saw as flaws. A new dawn. 1 year after the Epsilon Station incident, Sarah stood in the grand auditorium of the Galactic Medical Academy, watching with pride as Kareth addressed the incoming class. The young Vilaxians' crystalline form glowed with confidence, their latest version of the ACE's suit seamlessly integrated with their natural biology. Medicine isn't about overcoming limitations, Kareth was saying, their translator rendering their biochemical signals into passionate speech. It's about understanding that what we call limitations are often just opportunities we haven't recognized yet. The auditorium was filled with students from dozens of species, including 3 other Vilaxians with CDS who would never have had this opportunity before. Sarah's cybernetic eye picked out the subtle adaptive technologies now integrated throughout the academy: crystalline environmental controls, biomechanical interfaces, hybrid support systems that drew inspiration from both human and Vilaxian engineering. Dr. Chen taught me that the greatest breakthroughs often come from the places we least expect, KRF continued. A human combat medic and a disabled Vilaxian creating technology that has changed how we approach environmental adaptation in space. Who would have predicted that? Sarah smiled, remembering the skepticism they'd faced just a year ago. Now, the ACE's technology was being adapted for everything from deep space exploration to emergency response on extreme environment worlds. The original prototype sat in the Academy's museum, alongside other revolutionary medical innovations that had changed galactic society. But the real breakthrough wasn't the technology. Karatha's voice grew softer, more intense. It was the understanding that diversity, in biology, in perspective, in experience, isn't an obstacle to be overcome. It's our greatest strength in facing the challenges that lie ahead. After the speech, as the audience dispersed, Admiral Zhang approached Sarah. The old officer's cybernetic implants gleamed under the auditorium lights. Quite a change from the old days, Zhang remarked, watching a group of students, human, Vilaxian, and Centaurian, discussing something with animated enthusiasm. Remember when we thought different species could barely work together in emergency medicine? Sarah nodded, absently rubbing her shoulder implant. We've come a long way since then. Though I have to admit, even I didn't expect things to change this fast. That's because you gave them something they couldn't ignore. A new voice joined them. Dr. Venare approached, their multiple eyes reflecting the crystalline lighting that now enhanced the Academy's traditional illumination. Not just new technology, but a new way of thinking about adaptation itself. KRF did that, Sarah corrected. I just helped them get their foot in the door. No, KRF said, joining their conversation. We did it together. Just like humans and Vilaxians did during the liberation of New Jakarta, and like we're doing now with the new deep space medical response units. They all watched as another group of students passed by, one wearing a modified version of the ACE's suit that allowed them to function despite their species' unique gravitational requirements. The Academy's applications are up 300% from non-standard candidates, Venare reported. Species we never thought could participate in space-based medicine are developing their own adaptive solutions based on your work. The Crystalline Interface Medical Division is becoming our fastest growing department. And the combat medicine applications are revolutionary, Zhang added. The new emergency response suits have already saved dozens of lives in extreme conditions. The brass is talking about establishing a whole new division dedicated to adaptive medical technology. Sarah felt a warm glow of satisfaction that had nothing to do with the crystalline environmental controls. So what's next? She asked KRF. Now that you've revolutionized space medicine and broken down a few impossible barriers, what's your next challenge? The young Vilaxian's surface rippled with what Sarah had learned was their equivalent of an ambitious smile. Actually, I've been studying some interesting patterns in transdimensional biology. There's this theory about using crystalline matrices to stabilize quantum medical procedures. Stop, Sarah groaned, but she was grinning. Let me guess, everyone says it's impossible. Completely impossible, KRF confirmed cheerfully. They say the energy requirements alone make it unfeasible, not to mention the biological compatibility issues. When do we start? Around them, the Academy hummed with activity, its halls filled with the future of galactic medicine. In laboratories and classrooms, students and teachers of all species work together, each bringing their unique perspectives and abilities to the endless challenge of healing. And in a small research lab, a human and a Vilaxian began sketching out their next impossible breakthrough, proving once again that the greatest advances often came not from overcoming differences, but from embracing them. The universe, after all, had infinite possibilities. It just took the right combination of determination, creativity, and friendship to unlock them. As Sarah watched KIRF begin calculating their latest set of impossible equations, she smiled. The galaxy might think it was ready for what came next, but she knew better. They were just getting started. The end.